Well, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Joshua Mostow. I'm a professor here in the Department of Asian Studies. But more importantly, today I am a longtime colleague of Professor Josephine Chiu-Duke. We have been thinking of having lectures, final lectures. That sounds bad, doesn't it? Final lectures. Well, winding up lectures by retiring faculty members for a while now, but Professor Chiu-Duke seemed the perfect person to start this initiative with. She graciously consented to do it, and we said, well, we would do it here in the auditorium. And she said, oh, no, that will look awful. Only 10 or 20 people will come. And it will look bad. And I suspected that wasn't true. I suspected that after all her years of teaching and research and publishing and community involvement, there would be quite a response. And you've proven me right, so I'm very happy about that. I'm sorry we're not exactly well engineered in doing these things, so there wasn't quite as much dim sum as there should have been. But I hope you'll bear with us. In any event, thank you again for coming, and I would now like to introduce the head of the Department of Asian Studies, Professor Sharalyn Orbaugh.
Thank you. And I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered here on the traditional unceded territory of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. The Musqueam people, together with other Coast Salish peoples, have lived on this land for a millennia, for more, and they have learned and taught new generations, and we are privileged to be able to carry on that work with them on their land. So as Professor Mostow said, I'm Sharalyn Orbaugh, head of the Department of Asian Studies, and it's my privilege to be able to introduce today's speaker. Thank you all for coming today. I want to welcome you to, as Joshua just said, the inaugural lecture in a series intended to showcase the scholarship of Asian Studies faculty members who are about to retire. Many departments give gifts to their retiring colleagues, but not us. We make our colleagues work for their retirement. Dr. Josephine Chiu-Duke was first employed as a teacher by UBC as early as 1983, and she became a regular faculty member in 1992. So that's 33 years ago. She's been here longer, I think, than anyone else who is currently in the department. She was promoted to full professor in 2019. I counted up from her CV, and she's taught more than 125 classes at UBC over the years. So just think about how many undergraduate and graduate students have been enriched intellectually through those classes. In 2004, the department recognized her skill as an instructor through a nomination for the Killam Teaching Prize, which is the highest award that UBC gives for teaching. She's also been active in disseminating her research to both an academic and a broader community. In addition to many, many journal articles and book chapters, Dr. Chiu-Duke has co-translated with Dr. Michael Duke, who's also here, 3 book-length works from Chinese to English, has co-edited 2 volumes on Chinese history and culture, also with Michael Duke, and was the sole editor for 2 important volumes. She's also published 2 monographs. In 2000, was To Rebuild the Empire, Liu Zhu's, and pardon my Chinese, pragmatist approach to the mid-Tang predicament, which revises previous long-standing misrepresentations of this important figure and contributes to our understanding of mid-Tang Confucian revival. And in 2023, she published In Search of Liberty, Lin Yusheng's Life and Thought. Among the many impacts of her multitudinous and multifarious publications, her essays on Tang Dynasty women led to a new appreciation of the subject by demonstrating that they were more influential in the public, political, and intellectual spheres than had been previously imagined. And her translations of, and publications about, Nobel Prize winner Liu Xiaobo have illuminated for a global audience the Chinese search for liberal democracy. But a facet of Dr. Chiu-Duke's career that I want to particularly highlight today is her position as a public intellectual, something that many of us would love to be, but are not. She has been interviewed more than 140 times by various media outlets, local, national, and international, in both Chinese and English, including the CBC, the Vancouver Sun, the National Post, the Globe and Mail, pretty much all the Canadian newspapers, the Tsingtao Daily, the Ningpo Daily, Maclean's magazine, several TV networks. And she has spoken in these interviews about Chinese and Taiwanese geopolitics primarily. Again, it's hard to imagine. It's impossible for us to actually know the huge number of people who have been edified and enlightened by her public presentations. But the fact that so many of you are here today, I think gives us a sense of how many lives she has touched. I've been reflecting on the fact that it's possible to work closely with someone as a departmental colleague for years and years without ever having an opportunity to hear them talk about their research. So I'm delighted at the prospect today of finding out more about a colleague that I've known since my arrival here 28 years ago. Please join me in welcoming Professor Josephine Chiu-Duke.
Let me thank Professor Sharalyn Orbaugh again and Professor Joshua Mostow for providing me this opportunity to share with you some of my reflections on Taiwan democracy and the Chinese humanistic tradition. I would also like to thank Professor Chris Ray, Professor Alison Bailey, Professor Xu Xiaowen, and Professor Timothy Cheek, and Professor Pittman Potter, and Professor Richard Lin, and many others I cannot just suddenly put in my head, and for joining us today. And of course, I would also like to thank our department staff, especially Ms. Lisa Matsumoto and Ms. Charlotte Chua, for making all the preparation for today's event. Certainly, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today here. And it is really a great pleasure and honor for me. I feel delighted and humbled to be able to participate in this Capstone lecture series for building a meaningful new tradition for our department. As you can see, my topic today is exceedingly broad, but since the topic is closely related to my teaching and my research in the past 30-some years, and Taiwan, with its official title, the Republic of China, is the first and thus far also the only liberal democracy in the Chinese language world. And the People's Republic of China is now the economic and military superpower in the international community. So I feel it may be helpful to present to you some of my concerns here. Needless to say, I hope the complex dynamics and the continuous tension between Taiwan and the People's Republic discussed in this talk today can someday resolved peacefully. And the tension can also be transformed into a positive force to help sustain a coercion-free Taiwan Straits, not to mention the Indo-Pacific region. Nevertheless, we all know that history is contingent, and the realization of any hope always depends on many different factors, and many of these factors are always unpredictable. Therefore, I am under no illusion that my hope will be realized any day soon. Bearing that in mind, I think it's fair to say that you probably would all agree that we live in a rapidly changing world where liberal democracy has been and is still wrangling with what the noted political scientist Francis Fukuyama has said, its own discontents. While such discontents have played an important part for the rise of political leaders with strong populist appeal in Europe as well as in the US, nevertheless, historian Timothy Snyder at Yale once cautions that, and I quote, "Authoritarianism begins when we can no longer tell the difference between the true and the appealing," end quote. Other scholars, such as Mark Lilla at Columbia and Kim Schapelle at Princeton, also call our attention to the protection of the fundamental principles of the liberal democracy and the related political institution which have been serving as the foundation of our liberal democracy under the rule of law. These scholars' concerns reveal a fragile aspect of liberal democracy. That is, when confronting an elected political leader's policies that can intentionally or unintentionally subvert democracy by legal means, then such a democracy will be in crisis. Many of us usually don't pay much attention to the fragility of liberal democracy. But when the loss of so many human lives and the destruction of people's homeland caused by invasive wars constantly unfold on our television and computer screens, then Immanuel Kant's 1795 idea of a world of quote-unquote perpetual peace is naturally going farther and farther away as an impossible dream, if not already just an empty talk or merely a truism. And yet, we know longing for perpetual peace has never disappeared from our imagining. And historical experience has also agreed with Kant that independent and free republics with representative government and the separation of powers tend in general to advocate peace rather than promoting war. Seen from this perspective, it is not surprising that Kant's idea about perpetual peace has been recognized as resembling a modern democratic peace theory. We may even wonder if Kant's idea actually influenced Winston Churchill's attitude toward democracy. We know in 1947, Churchill cited someone else's comment on democracy, stating that democracy is, quote, the worst form of government except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time, end quote. We can, of course, dismiss Churchill's statement as nothing but an overused cliche, especially since we all know that realpolitik, often makes democracy irrelevant in the international arena. And yet, it is important to note that so far, liberal democracy does not seem to have ceased to inspire people in different corners of the world as something worthy of their pursuit, if only just for a life free from fear and oppression. In fact, liberal democracy continues to be seen as a better path to modernity, even though we know it is not a panacea that will lead us to a perfect order. No wonder Taiwan's peaceful transformation from authoritarian rule to liberal democracy in the early 1990s has received high praise for its remarkable political achievements. To a great extent, we can say the fundamental principles of liberal democracy and the related political institution of a democratic system have basically all been materialized in Taiwan since the abolition of the nearly 38 years of the martial law in July 1987. During the process of its democratization, Taiwan did face and is still facing many challenges. The most troubling one, as many of you know, comes from the People's Republic of China due to its unfounded claim of sovereignty over Taiwan, despite the fact that it has never ruled the island in any manner or for any single day. In the past years, China has also threatened the island with increasing coercion by its air force and the close-range naval maneuvers, not to mention the possible use of its military to annex Taiwan. Although these threats have cast a dark shadow over the future of Taiwan, Taiwan democracy has been thriving and moving forward steadily. Moreover, since Taiwan's production of quote-unquote over 90% of the world's semiconductors has already made Taiwan a pivotal link in the world supply chain, this critical economic position has led journalists and scholars to call our attention to Taiwan's predicament. For example, a 2024 book entitled Why Taiwan Matters makes it clear that although a small island, Taiwan actually can, quote-unquote, dictate our future if leaders in the democratic countries fail to ensure the status quo between the island and mainland China. The cautions raised in this 2024 book certainly deserve our attention. But I also feel it necessary to discuss Taiwan's relationship with China from a perspective that is usually much less emphasized. That is, in addition to its impressive political and economic achievements, I would like to emphasize that Taiwan today is actually the only place where Chinese culture, especially with regard to the values embedded in the Confucian humanistic tradition, has been best preserved since 1949 without being deliberately destroyed as it was during the Chinese Cultural Revolution. But let me say a few words about the most recent conflict in Taiwan's Congress so as to better contextualize my arguments. You probably know that since 2021, Taiwan Democracy has been identified by The Economist as one of the 10 most exemplary models for several years in their ranking system. Taiwan Democracy has also been ranked at the very top, next only to Australia, among all those countries with population over 20 million. However, the most recent conflict in Taiwan's Congress between the opposition parties, including the long-established Nationalist Party or the KMT, along with a relatively new small party, the Taiwan People's Party, and the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, has made Taiwan Democracy lose its exemplary rank in the Economist evaluation. The conflict was such that it made some scholars state that Taiwan Democracy is in fact in regress. This conflict, in a way, is not new because it is still entangled with the continuation or continuous tension between China and Taiwan. Such a tension has made many people in Taiwan regard some members within the KMT party as having become local agents for the Chinese Communist government on the mainland. Because the KMT and the new Taiwan People's Party currently occupy the majority seats in the Congress, the supporters of the ruling party, DPP, fear these opposition representatives have, for example, deliberately tried to paralyze the normal function of the government through unreasonable cuts and the freezing of the government's general budget. To what extent this fear can be substantiated is not the focus of my present presentation, but such fear is certainly understandable once we consider that a huge 2014 sunflower movement was held precisely due to a fear of being swallowed by China when the then KMT-led government proposed a cross-strait agreement on trade in services. For now, since the DPP's supporters, that is, the supporters of the ruling party, are concerned about having the Congress become a staging ground for the opposition to paralyze the government, they and the other civic groups have initiated a recall movement against the opposition representatives. But then, a counter-recall movement was also initiated by the KMT supporters. Due to the fact that political recall in Taiwan includes several stages and the required number of supporters increase after the first stage. Thus, it is difficult for us to know if the recall and the counter-recall movements will continue to its logical end, despite the recall movement having already completed its first required stage. To be sure, I should not ignore the claim that some members of the KMT representatives may be local agents working for the Chinese government in the Congress in Taiwan. If such a claim can be validated, then it would create a dilemma for Taiwan democracy. For one thing, based on the principle of majority rule, the supporters of the ruling party should clearly accept the bills passed by the Congress. In other words, they should not have started a recall movement. However, if the supporters of the ruling party recall was organized out of their compelling need to resist the encroachment of pro-Chinese government forces on Taiwan democracy, then their recall would make sense on the ground that it is the only mechanism before the next election that Taiwan civil society can fall back on when they believe they have to take actions right away to protect their democracy and their way of life. Having explained the current conflict in Taiwan and its possible implications, let me now discuss the core values embedded in the Chinese humanistic tradition. When we talk about humanistic values, we generally mean an affirmation of human dignity and individual worth, regardless of a person's social background. This understanding is quite similar to Kant's idea of treating every person as an end rather than a means. Here, we can see that a sense of equality is already implied in Kant's idea. And in his last scholarly research book, published in 2014, the late renowned Professor Yu Yingshi traces the origin of ancient Chinese thought and at the same time also discussed why Confucius was indeed the first Chinese thinker who laid the foundation of the Chinese humanistic tradition. Anyone who has read Confucius' Analects will know that Confucius said he was willing to offer instructions regardless of a person's social status. Based on his attitude toward education, we also can detect a sense of equality. But where did Confucius get this idea of equality, right? The disintegration of the class-based social political order in Confucius' time was obviously a major contextual factor. But when we follow Professor Yu Yingshi's 2014 study, we see that Confucius' own reflection on his time, especially on his own relationship with heaven, actually led him to develop a sense of equality and subsequently open up a new direction for the development of Chinese culture. The key example we can use is Confucius' reinterpretation of the doctrine of the mandate of heaven. According to this doctrine, we know that the founder of the Zhou dynasty in the 11th century BCE was said to be a morally virtuous ruler and was thus selected by heaven to receive its mandate so that he could replace the corrupt current ruler and set up a new dynasty to improve the public welfare. In addition to the traditional textual information about the heavenly mandate in the Shu Jing, or the book of history, and in the Shi Jing, or book of songs, Professor Yu Yingshi also called our attention to a passage inscribed on a bronze plate excavated in 1976. This passage contains a sentence which says, "The Lord on high bequeathed or gave the fine de." And this means the supreme deity, Lord on high, here, Lord on high, okay? Or really heaven to the Zhou people, bequeathed the fine de to the founder of the Zhou. And this founder of the Zhou, of course, you know, known to us as Zhou Wenwang, or the culture king of the Zhou dynasty. Okay? Now, since de had already been interpreted by the Japanese scholar Kominami Ichiro as closely related or even as an equivalent to the heavenly mandate, we can certainly interpret the meaning of that sentence as heaven bequeathed the culture king with its mandate. Meanwhile, we also see a sentence in the Analects that is almost identical with the one inscribed on the bronze plate cited above. Okay. Now, the background of the sentence in the Analects involves a particular person's plan to kill Confucius. And rather than escaping right away, Confucius actually affirmed that since that particular person can do nothing about it because heaven produced the de that is in me, that is to say, in Confucius. That's what he said. So heaven produced the de in me. What could that particular person do to me? Right? And at the same time, we also see that in the Analects, Confucius did indeed say that he understood heavenly mandate and that he believed heaven also understood him. Therefore, when we compare the specific sentence inscribed on the bronze plate with what Confucius said in the Analects about heaven producing de in him, it becomes clear that Confucius was confident that he, just like the founder of the Zhou dynasty, was equally bequeathed with the de from heaven. In other words, Confucius believed he was just as equal as the Zhou ruler in terms of receiving the heavenly mandate. From this, it also becomes clear that, also as Professor Yu Yingshi argued, Confucius believed that the Son of Heaven did not have a monopoly relationship with heaven. Moreover, following Professor Yu Yingshi's argument, we learn that Professor Yu argues that the nature of the Son of Heaven's mandate should not be interpreted as a personal gift from heaven to the founder, because this mandate to the dynastic ruler was mainly concerned with the fate of a dynasty. And by contrast, when Confucius said that he understood the heavenly mandate, he was saying, or really he was implying, that each and every person could be just like him in terms of receiving this mandate as a personal gift from heaven. Thus, Confucius was actually implying that not just him, but also everyone else was just as equal as the Son of Heaven. This implied meaning was reaffirmed by Mencius, and even more clearly by the Taoist master Zhuangzi. Now, in the book of Zhuangzi, we see in an imaginary conversation, and Zhuangzi spoke through his persona, expressed the view and said that he was a person who can associate with heaven. And such a person knows that he and the Son of Heaven are both heaven's children. In other words, based upon Zhuangzi's statement, we can say that in the eyes of heaven, everyone is equal. So leaving aside Zhuangzi's amazing statement of his sense of equality, what we need to point out is that for Confucius, heaven has already become the realm where the Tao, or the moral way, resides. We know this Tao was then portrayed as the transcendental and the ultimate standard that Confucius or Confucius followers could rely upon to criticize current political reality and at the same time to seek reforms. In short, through Confucius, a critical spirit was instilled into Chinese culture, and it was this critical spirit that gave rise to a morally autonomous individual who could choose to, quote unquote, follow the Tao rather than follow the ruler, 从道不从君. And this crucial principle then began to take hold among the followers of Confucius. I believe that it was precisely this crucial principle derived from Confucius' sense of equality that led him to travel around seeking rulers who would accept his advice during a chaotic time. Confucius clearly believed that a ruler should be just like a benevolent man who, quote unquote, helps others to take their stand insofar as he himself wishes to take his stand, and get others there insofar as he himself wishes to get there. 己欲立而立人，己欲达而达人, as you all know. Okay? Confucius certainly would also prefer peace to war. Otherwise, we would not read that he refused to discuss military affairs with a certain ruler, or that his disciples state that, quote unquote, within the 4 seas, we are all brothers. 四海之内皆兄弟也. Right? So we may very well say that this idea that the world is nothing but a brotherhood was also derived from Confucius' sense of equality. Such an idea, or such a sense of equality, propelled Confucius not just to teach his followers without reference to their social status, but also to consider everyone as an equal member in a collective order. As a result, we see that he made a breakthrough into reflective thinking on what an ideal social political order should be. And such an intellectual breakthrough, in turn, led to a new direction for the development of Chinese culture. And this new direction, undoubtedly, impelled Confucius to admonish his disciples to remember that services in government was not just to serve the ruler, but really to serve the society as a whole. Based on Confucius' teaching, we see Chinese culture developing humanistic values that are not just culturally specific, but really also universally applicable. And this development of universal humanistic values must have caused the German philosopher Karl Jaspers, in his 1949 German version of the book, or entitled The Origin of History, to regard Chinese culture as one of his axial age civilizations that first emerged during the time between 800 and 200 BCE. I won't go into details about how Confucius reinterpreted the key concept of Junzi and the Ren here, but it is sufficient to say that Confucius' concept of Junzi was used to refer to morally superior men instead of sons of the aristocrats. Meanwhile, the meaning of Ren, usually translated as benevolence or humaneness, and the meaning of Ren was also changed from manly or manliness to signify the totality of all fine moral virtues. And herein also lies the reason why we say Chinese culture was reoriented toward a new direction opened up by Confucius. As valuable a contribution as Confucius' teaching made to Chinese culture and to the world, it was, however, never able to make an institutional breakthrough in the sense that, except for remonstrance, no effective institutional mechanism was ever established to restrain the abuse of political power. Thus, throughout traditional Chinese history, Confucian intellectual protests against the abuse of political power all ended with tragic results. Against this background, we can understand why during the 1915 May 4th New Culture movement, many leading Chinese intellectuals began to attack the Confucian tradition as the main obstacle for China's search for wealth and power. Many of them also wanted to overthrow the age-old tradition and started to advocate liberal democracy and science as the necessary goals for China's path to modernity. Unfortunately, historical developments gave rise to increasingly more powerful nationalist sentiments against the imperialist power at the time, so much so that they eventually led China to embark on the road to a socialist new country. Meanwhile, the cunning of history also led the KMT, after being defeated in the civil war with the Chinese Communist Party, to escape to Taiwan in 1949. They restored the Republic of China on the island, but with a tight control of the population until they started the process of democratization in late 1980s. By contrast, the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949 meant that liberal democracy could no longer survive under a Communist Party-led socialist regime. Although China's opening up in the 1980s after the total failure of its experiment of an extreme form of socialism has made China the second largest economic entity in today's world, it has not lived up to its promised political reform. Its violent suppression of the Tiananmen peaceful demonstration in early June of 1989 is a case in point. Not to mention its imposition of a quote-unquote national security law on Hong Kong in 2020, making this previously known quote-unquote Pearl of the Orient into a place where freedom is no longer something one can take for granted. And yet, we know that in early 2023, the Chinese government put forward a Global Civilization Initiative, or 全球文明倡议 project. In it, China advocates universal values such as peace, development, fairness, justice, democracy, and freedom. Countries are also urged not to impose their own values on other countries or engage in ideological confrontation. Even if this project is only Chinese government propaganda, we can certainly use it to hold China accountable to its own proposal. I, for one, will at least argue that if China today is genuinely serious about this 2023 project, it should see Taiwan and its democracy as a most viable reference for the success of their project. Although many problems still remain, Taiwan has indeed tried to put all those universal values mentioned in China's Global Civilization Initiative into practice through its own democratic institutions. In other words, based on its own stated aspirations, China should take Taiwan as its best reference, not just for realizing its Global Civilization Initiative, but really also for its long-promised political reform. In a word, China should coexist with Taiwan peacefully, and it should not regard Taiwan as a target for annexation. Only in this way can Taiwan democracy maintain its support for the healthy development of the Chinese humanistic tradition, with the value of this tradition continuing on to serve as a source, not just for elevating the civility and the quality of Taiwan democracy, but also for sustaining a meaningful cultural life in Taiwan society. And only in this way can China also earn our respect as a reasonable superpower that will finally honor its own humanistic tradition. Perhaps it is also in this way that Taiwan democracy and the Chinese humanistic tradition can work together to make a contribution to the twin goals of world peace and stability. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much for that fascinating address. And Professor Chiu-Duke has graciously agreed to take questions. We have, I believe, volunteers around with microphones? Without microphones? They're going to need a microphone. So you'll take this mic, and I'll use that mic. Good. All right. Never going to get this yet. So I will play MC and call on people to ask questions, and then please wait until one of the student helpers gives you a microphone, and then ask your question, please.
I will use that.
You will use this.
Yeah, it's okay.
We
I don't know.
Keep this in just English or English and Chinese?
You decide.
I'm not going to decide. All right, well, we'll see how it goes. So first question, I see a hand way back there.
Maybe they can use Chinese and I'll translate into English.
If you're willing to do that,
Yeah,
that would be great.
okay.
I'll give that to you.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, thank you very much, Professor Chiu, for a really interesting lecture, taking us really through, over 2,000 years of forethought and political thought. Very ambitious, and I really enjoyed it. I have one main question, and it's about the equality that you mentioned in the Confucian Humanistic Tradition. I confess that your use of the term equality really surprised me, because I think that in many ways we can say maybe commensurability or reciprocity or all these other sort of similar terms might exist in sort of Confucian tradition, but equality as such, I'm interested in how you would define equality, because it's not something that we typically hear as being part of Confucian thought.
No, that's right. You're right. You're perfectly right. Yeah. I mean, I've been reading, as I mentioned, Professor Yu Yingshi's book and all his other works, because I'm writing something about his research. And he, as far as I know, in addition to the late, also a well-known Professor D.C. Lau, okay? Professor Lau is the author who translated the book of Mencius and the Confucius Analects and so on and so forth. Right? And when I read, went back and reread Professor D.C. Lau's translation and his introduction to Analects, I realized that he never used the term equality, all right? But as I said, when you read the Analects, when Confucius said 有教无类, or instruction without regard to a person's social background, you already sense a sort of equality in that phrase, right? Even though you don't use that term. But in other words, what I'm trying to say is that, like other scholars have already pointed out, even though ancient Chinese thinker never used the concept like we used after the Enlightenment in the West, after 17th, 18th century, we never used those terms, equality, fraternity, and so on and so forth, right? That kind of idea did exist in ancient China. But I followed Professor Yu Yingshi's study, and I believe the sense of equality really is the core, underlie Confucius' thought, Mencius' thought, and even Zhuangzi. And that sense of equality pushed Confucius to step forward during chaotic time. And he was willing to advise those rulers, you should take care of your population's welfare. You should enrich them and then teach them. Right? You should provide them a minimum amount of economic security first. Right? He's not just an empty talk idealist. He has his very practical side, I mean Confucius. Right? And why would he do that? I mean, that's why I believe this kind of a sense of equality pushed him to do that. And that is why in the book of Mencius, we read, Mencius said, everyone has this heart which cannot suffer which cannot endure or bear to see the suffering of other people, right? So 不忍人之心. Because you have that kind of a heart, you have that kind of feeling. And why would you have that kind of feeling? Because you and I are equal. We both are human beings. Why should you suffer and I just sit here watching you suffer? You see, that's why I believe that even the minimum sense of equality pushed Confucius to step forward. Same thing can be said about Mencius. But Zhuangzi, he pursued another high level of life, right? But even he would have that idea. He said, I am associated with heaven. 天徒, 天徒者. 那什么是天徒者? What is the person who can associate with heaven? 天徒者 knows 天子和己. So son of heaven and I, 皆天之所子, are all heaven's born children. So you see that, you cannot, language is our basic tool to express our inner feeling. You cannot run away with this sense of equality when you discuss these ancient scholars. But why? We never really go into it until Professor Yunshi started to put his energy there. Well, of course, it's too complicated. I cannot completely discuss his discovery, but basically that's what I get from reading his work. All right? Okay.
Professor, chair, please. Can we get a microphone for him?
Oh.
There we go. Good.
So first of all, thank you for that national lecture, and I'm always inspired and humbled by your work. And I hesitate to say anything, and just on the equality issue, it reminds me of the discussion around the Magna Carta.
Yes.
But the Magna Carta was not about ordinary people.
No.
In fact, the barons who made sure the Magna Carta got enacted at sword point had no interest at all
Yes.
in the common people. But that doesn't mean that the term of equality and accountability that they were proposing has subsequently been interpreted to be more expansive.
Yes.
So we might say that in Confucian days, again, I defer, but the equality may have been just among the elite, but it was then interpreted, as you suggest, to include other people, and that's the process of language. So that's just a thought. But the other thought I had,
Yes.
and I'm sorry to get into this.
Can I answer first? Otherwise, I forget. Well, but Pittman, in the Analects, Confucius' son-in-law actually was a prisoner. So he obviously was willing to marry his own daughter to a prisoner.
Sure.
You see, so in that sense, he is not talking about his ideas purely from an elite's point of view. And that's why I think he is great.
I defer.
No.
Well, obviously died in prison.
Yes.
But Liu Xiaobo was third member of the intellectual elite.
Yes, of course.
So this is an ongoing debate. But
Yeah.
the thing really what struck me about the comment is that is on the Global
Yes,
Civilization Initiative.
yes.
So this strikes me as, and I wrote about this in my recent book, a classic example of Da Hong Qi Fan, which is to use the terminology that liberals think are warming the heart.
Yes.
So if I go through and I look at peace, they equate peace with stability.
I know.
And that's what they're doing in Xinjiang.
Of course.
Like peace.
Yes,
Development, they talk about the right to development, which should take precedent over any other.
yes,
When
yes.
they talk about equity, that's equity as determined by the party, not grounded in equality. When they talk about justice, that is a formalized interpretation of justice. The Chinese consider the national security law in Hong Kong to be justice,
Yes,
democracy. China considers itself to have
I know.
China considers its people to have true freedom.
Yeah.
So what we see in that is, again, Da Hong Qi Fan. But it's also an opportunity for scholars like you and other people in the room to take those words and hold China to them. And China anticipated this by saying states should not impose their values on others.
I know. That's
So
what.
it does open the opportunity.
Yes.
You pointed that out.
Thank you so much. I didn't want to mention, something like that because when I quote that Global Civilization Initiative, Michael said, "You are a fool." Michael Duke is my husband, just so. He said, right. He said, you are always so naive, taking their narrative as at face value. I said, so what? Once they put it out, then it becomes in the public realm. We can interpret it in our way, right? Otherwise, why let them monopolize the narrative, right? So yeah. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah.
Another question here? We can get the microphone. Just like it. Tennis match. The ball.
Thank you, Professor Chiu-Duke. I think my question is that what exactly Chinese Humanistic Tradition want to learn about Taiwanese democracy? Because if we think about Taiwanese democracy, the process of democratization, that a lot of them is actually like people involved, influenced by Japanese or like in Western ideas. I don't, as I can remember, not many Confucian or like Confucian culture, Chinese or even Buddhist or something. So if they really learn from Taiwan democracy, so they are Japanization or like Westernization.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, but I don't know your name, but you Qian. Okay, thank you. But you see, after 1945, the situation is very different because a generation of intellectual or elite, educated elite, during the Japanese occupation period, they were basically either sent to jail or killed during the infamous 228 or February 28 incident in 1947, right? Because the then governor of the island, he wanted to put all the resources together to assist Chiang Kai-shek, the KMT leader, fighting the communist regime in China, on the mainland. And so he drafted young men to be the soldier, and he also tried to exploit as much resources from the island as possible and then transfer them to the mainland to help the civil war. And so it made the inflation went out of control, and people were, living in an extremely uneasy way. And so then explosion, the killing and all that. And then Chiang Kai-shek from mainland sending troops and killed hundreds and thousands of people on that horrible day, February 28, 1947. And from then, you can say most of the outstanding educated elite were wiped out. If they were not wiped out, they tried to go abroad, either to United States or to Canada. And they remained silent, and they became totally demoralized. Yeah.
So if we think about Li Denghui, that he's very Japanese.
But Li Denghui is a very different case, all right? Li Denghui became the president of Republic of China in 1988, right? And he is the first local-born Taiwanese educated elite to become the president of the Republic of China, right? But Li Denghui is a very different case. He served under Chiang Kai-shek's son, Jiang Jingguo. And he later in his memoir talked about how careful he tried to be serving the Generalissimo's son, right? And he was educated in Cornell. He certainly knew what liberal democracy was all about, right? But you have to understand, when Generalissimo's son, CCK, Jiang Jingguo, passed away, he did not pass on his regime or his power to a military strongman. He let the Republic of China's constitution run its own course. When I said this to my students in my Taiwan history course, some of the students hated me for that, because they think CCK is just a dictator, just a, you know, he was used to be the boss of the Taiwan CIA and persecuted so many people who were trying to fight against the authoritarian rule. But we cannot neglect the fact that CCK or Jiang Jingguo could have indeed let a military strongman to come in and to take control of the whole island, and would not let Li Denghui, the Taiwanese-born, educated elite, agricultural PhD, to take over the power, to be the first president, a Taiwanese president on the island. So you have to give him some credit, all right? And we can say, oh, he was under tremendous pressure from the whole society, from the United States, and from other sources. And his sons all died, no success. All that, I granted all that. But still, he didn't have to do it. You know, he didn't have to do it, but he did it. So there is some kind of political wisdom in this guy. Even if you say, well, that political wisdom is probably related to his obsession with his historical fame, fine. Many politicians obsessed with their position in history wouldn't do it, but he did it. I'm not his fan, okay? But
any other comments, questions? Yes, please, in the middle there.
Mr. Lam, right? Mr. Lam. Yeah, go ahead. Here.
Let's get the microphone because we are recording.
Here. Yeah, here.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you very much for your very enlightening lecture. Well, this is really like, could I ask a geopolitical question?
Sure, sure.
We are all struck by what's been happening in Washington the past month or so. What the new ruler in Washington has been thinking and doing regarding Ukraine, for example, and his alleged ambition to take over Greenland, Panama, and to convert Canada to the neutral state and so forth. My friends in Taiwan are very worried that, as has been illustrated by the case of Ukraine, there's a possibility that Trump, the ruler I referred to, might somehow or other strike a deal with the PRC authorities and regarding Washington's Taiwan policy, repeat in some fashion what he is perceived as doing with Ukraine, and that is strike a deal with the Putin administration. So my friends in Taiwan are really worried about what might happen. What do you think about this, and what do you think the Taipei authorities should do about this? Or what could they do, given the fact that Taiwan has, for the past 2 decades, been very reliant upon American support? Thank you.
Okay, this is a very deep and important question. I'm not really I don't really have the specialty to discuss it, but as a citizen, I think I can make some comment, all right? Well, I think nobody would like to see a big power bully a small power, right? But I don't think Ukraine's situation is completely the same as the situation in Taiwan. For one thing, geographically, there is a Taiwan Strait, right? Which would, to a certain, even a minimum extent, to sort of prevent the Chinese warship to just cross the strait and then attack the population on the island. And at the same time, I think Taiwan's you know TSMC, right? You know this Taiwan, the main company which produce over 90% of semiconductors chips in Taiwan. And that is really the treasure of the island. And Trump is trying every possible way to get the company to United States. And their boss did promise to invest 100 billion US dollars in United States and will increase the factory to produce chips in United States, increase 4 factories, as far as I know, right? But Trump, the most he can do is to be the president for another 3 years. That is to say, if he does not try to change the Constitution, right? I mean, I have a Trump basher at home every day. It just, I know. I just keep silent because nobody can predict the future. Nobody. And I don't believe Trump. Trump is a business guy, right? He loves to make deals. And Taiwan is good at making deals. And he has the capital to make deal at this stage. So make deal with this guy. And he wants our chips. And we want your protection. And if you don't provide us protection, then you will see what is going to happen to you, not just to us, right? And that is why Zelensky's comments say, you don't want to think that something like this will not happen to you, because it will. The ambitious regime, they will always try to challenge the United States. Otherwise, they could not become the #1 hegemon in the international community. I mean, China certainly wants to do that, and we know that. So I always tell my students, you have 2 hegemons, or perhaps 3, but now it's really 2. You have a good hegemon, 善霸, and you have the bad hegemon, 恶霸. So who is the good hegemon and who is the bad hegemon? You know much better than I do. And by the way, Mr. Lam is the most famous political commentator in Hong Kong for many decades. So I'm really honored to have him join us this afternoon. I'm sorry I cannot comment any further.
Well, if there are no other burning questions, you have one? Okay. He's a student helper, he gets one.
Thank you for the talk. I really thought it was quite an interesting topic. When we're talking about freedom, I guess, and virtue and all these Confucian morals that, lay the foundation for China, and we're talking about the promotion of these, virtues in the present day. I can't help but think about how the situation is in places like North Korea, for example. Given that I'm Korean, I kind of think about how, if there were to be any change, I guess, for North Korea, I can't see that quick of a change happening in the future. Besides from being a dictator, I guess there's also the concerns that I would say that the Confucian moral of filial piety, or even just respecting your elders, kind of, I feel like also has an element that kind of halts this sort of progression towards the natural progression towards democracy in that country. So I was just wondering, would you say that these concerns are fitting for this discussion towards the People's Republic of China and Taiwan? Do you think that the issue that filial piety, or respecting your elders, is something that can maybe halt this natural progression towards democracy in any way, rather than promote it? Does that make sense?
I mean, it should be a contributing factor but I don't think it will be in any way a deciding factor, right? So, you know, power corrupt, absolute power corrupt absolutely, right? I mean, if there's any truth in the world, that is something I believe. And human being can degenerate to, you know, there's no boundary for the degeneration of human being. And North Korea has been in existence for 75 years. Right? So how much longer it would continue to exist, it really depends on to what extent outside information can go in. And it really depends whether or not their people can first, like what Confucius said, fulfill their belly. If they feel hungry all the time, nothing matters. Okay? So people have to have basic minimum security, material security, in order to think about other things. And that is why I said Confucius, Mencius, and all the other Confucian scholars, they are really not just empty talk idealists. They have their project, very pragmatic. But they became ideals in the sense when they challenged the political power, they were willing to stand firm, and they make sacrifices, always, always. Right? Like the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Dr. Liu Xiaobo in 2011. He made sacrifices, right? So that's all I can say.
Thank you. So I hope you'll join me in thanking Professor Chiu-Duke.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.